Meanwhile, countries around the world have bid farewell to 2016 and welcomed in the new year. The festivities largely went to plan without trouble. Although prior to New Year's Eve, authorities in many European countries were on high alert following the deadly terror attack in Berlin at a Christmas market in mid-December. And the German city of Cologne too is no exception, as last year's celebrations were marred by a string of robberies and sexual assaults. RT's Nikki Aaron reports now from the city.
Every year on New Year's Eve in Cologne, people take to the streets to watch the fireworks. It's become an annual tradition. But this year, it's a very different picture. There's a much smaller crowd. Usually this time brings out thousands of people. There's also a very different atmosphere. If you take a quick look around, there's a very heavy police presence. And this is because authorities want to make sure that everybody tonight remains safe and sound. And that's because this time last year, the New Year's Eve celebrations were marred by allegations of mass sexual assaults. There's more than 10 times the number of police officers on duty tonight that there were compared to last year. I spoke to a few people though, and they said that they're going to be avoiding the celebrations tonight. I spoke to some locals who said that they feel much safer staying away from public places like this. I'm now in the main square of the city, just opposite the Cologne Cathedral. This is where people would usually come to watch the fireworks. Usually thousands of people would be here. As you can see, it's just a scattering of a few. 2016 has been a difficult year for Germany. The country has seen multiple terror attacks, and it's hoped that the new year will bring new hope and a brighter future for Germany. This is Nikki Aaron for RT in Cologne.
Meanwhile, in Austria, police handed out thousands of pocket alarms on New Year's Eve as authorities there heightened security measures. Police said that the measures were aimed at preventing a repeat of what happened in Cologne in 2015. Women can use the gadgets to signal any potential dangerous situations. Now, Syria celebrated its first relatively peaceful New Year since 2011 after the recent ceasefire brokered by Turkey, Russia and Iran. According to this deal, Turkey and Russia are monitoring and assisting the process and are acting as guarantors. Russia's defence minister said that even 7 key opposition groups are party to the truce, amounting to some 62,000 rebel fighters. Groups that do not abide by the ceasefire will be considered terrorists. The document also calls for the rapid and safe delivery of humanitarian aid throughout the country. Well, the US was not involved in the ceasefire agreement, but Russia's ambassador to the UN does expect them to be involved in future peace talks.
Yes, we do expect that the Trump administration, after it comes into the White House on January 20, will be an important participant.
The main sticking point between the US and Russia in Syria is the debate over which groups are to be considered terrorists. RT's Murat Gazdiev has more on that.
John Kerry and Sergei Lavrov. For a while there, they were inseparable, visiting each other, closeting themselves away in Geneva for hours, for days at a time, trying to solve the world's problems. They had their moments, but when it came to Syria, it was abject failure. Whether it was arguing and blaming each other about an aid convoy attack, the reasons for a ceasefire failure, or the United States accidentally bombing Syrian troops, they just couldn't find a common position, common ground. And eventually, Russia had enough.
As for Jabhat al-Nusra, the US not only doesn't touch it, but during all our discussions, they tried in every way to formulate agreements so al-Nusra was not attacked. Of course, we can't accept that because al-Nusra is a terrorist organization, as admitted by the United Nations, the US, Russia and other countries.
Time to switch things around, mix things up. Enter the Troika, not the likeliest of A-teams, Iran, Russia and Turkey, but certainly one that gets things done. The Aleppo evacuation, thousands of lives saved, the city spared devastation. The ceasefire effort in Syria, the biggest ceasefire, theoretically, that the civil war has ever seen. Now they've got plans for a peace settlement, even a roadmap. They're now doing what the United States promised to do for years and finally separate the radical jihadists from the moderate opposition.
During the last 2 months, we spent most of the time developing maps to show where the main opposition groups could be divided, information we had earlier requested from the United States.
The United States just couldn't do it. They blamed Russia, they blamed Assad, they blamed the conditions. The Friends of Syria failed. The ISSG, International Syria Support Group, failed. The talks in Geneva failed. The Troika, the new Syrian coalition, is getting things done. They now have plans to expand, to grow, inviting a whole host of new nations, and noticeably absent among them is the United States, and that must not sit well with Washington.
The former Mayor of London, Ken Livingstone, explained why he's not surprised the US was sidelined in the Syrian ceasefire agreement.
I'm not surprised, because when you had the Arab uprising, the Arab Spring, and the various groups rose up against Assad, America gave support. It wanted Assad overthrown, because Assad has never been an ally of the West. He's been neutral, he's been often seen as pro-Russian, and they threw a lot of resources, I think, behind those terrorist groups trying to overthrow Assad. The trouble is that, of course, created a space for Islamic fundamentalist groups, and I think what's really encouraging about the deal that's been done is that they have been excluded, and all the other groups that were trying to overthrow Assad have recognised they're not going to do that, and it's better that they work with Assad and his regime to eliminate those Islamic terrorists.
Well, Carla Ortiz is a filmmaker who spent 8 months in Syria documenting the people caught up in the conflict. She also witnessed the evacuation of eastern Aleppo. Here's a clip from her upcoming documentary.
We are going to Jebel Bedroom because it's the place where they are liberating people, and they're letting them pass and free from the east side of Aleppo to the west side of Aleppo. This is from which front? Al-Nusra front?
Carla told us about her experiences in Syria.
On the east side of Aleppo, I was able to get close to the ones that were liberated little by little and advance there. It's an absolute devastation. You especially to talk to the people, and their point of view of things are completely different, because they've been living in the eye of the conflict. To my big surprise, because you are hearing this outside of Aleppo, but when you talk to somebody who just came out of East Aleppo, and they tell you most terrorists are foreigners, they're not even Syrians. They basically talk about how they have no food, no access to medicine, and how they were deprived to go to school, and how sometimes they had to really lock the children, and how they would use sometimes some of the children in order to blackmail some of the families to stay quiet or do something. Their life was really inhuman. The way they talk to you and the amount of hope they have now, and their happiness when they were crossing the border, it was indescribable. Their eyes and how they are praying, how they are thanking God, and they are thanking the Syrian army, and they have nothing to do with politics. You know, they're not even talking about supporting one side or another side. They're just very happy to be free of death.
Bombs are everywhere. People are running. They don't know where, just running.
We are here living a genocide, literally.
People are executed. It's as simple as that.
Look, I mean, it's very hard for me, because I don't want to discredit people, and I don't want to say that they are lying, but the point is that when I was in East Aleppo and I was in the cities covered by East Aleppo that were just liberated, there is no way, there's no internet. I couldn't even tell my family I made it alive. I mean, you hardly had WhatsApp. It's impossible to upload a video. You know, it would take me to upload a video at the hotel where it's safe and I have internet more than 2 hours. For me, it's like, how in the middle of all this you were able to have internet and send it when I have a phone that has international coverage from Europe and the United States, and I wasn't able to send a WhatsApp to my family.
You're watching RT International. Still ahead for you this hour. We look at the timing of America's latest sanctions on Russia and the expulsion of 35 diplomats. That story and more in a couple of minutes.
People with stories to tell. Those who deserve to be heard. Studied inside out, but still with unrevealed secrets. Leaders, politicians, thinkers, and witnesses. They're here to speak. Are you there to hear?
I'm Tom Hartman, and I'll give you what the mainstream media can't, the big picture.
There's been no charges filed in that case.
And when you question more, you find what you're looking for.
This is the legislative branch of
We'll go deeper, investigate, and debate, all so you can get the big picture.
Welcome back. Now, this week, more evidence emerged of terrorists using chemical weapons in Aleppo. Correspondents from Sputnik's Arabic news agency visited an alleged factory used by the militants. Well, here's video taken by the journalists inside the building, and as you can see, the floor is covered with purple stains that are presumably left by chemicals. Various canisters, packages and chemistry equipment are scattered around the building too. Syrian military officials say that chemicals were added here to the rebels' missiles and rockets and were then used on government forces as well as civilian areas of Aleppo. We discussed the issue with former Pentagon official Michael Malouf, who believes that more chemicals could be found.
There was actually plants of not only mustard gas but also sarin. They may have many other hidden depots of these chemicals, just like the ones that were just discovered in East Aleppo. So I wouldn't doubt that they're around. Now, they might be in Idlib, for all I know, and that's probably a very strong possibility, given that that's where the concentration of the rebels are right now, including Nusra. So it's again, I think that given the political developments that have occurred, including Turkey and Mr. Putin allowing Erdogan to be involved in all this, I think he's going to make a much more concerted effort to control those elements than has heretofore been occurring. So I think that I'm hoping that they can be able to uncover more of these chemical weapons and maybe even direct where the stores are hidden in order to eliminate them because of the potential threat of them.
Another big story of the week saw the Obama administration slap Russia with new sanctions over its alleged influence on the US presidential election last year. The move was announced on Thursday. 35 Russian diplomats have been ordered to leave the United States along with their families. Many of them are on their way home now after they were given just 72 hours to pack and leave. Alleged harassment of US staff overseas was cited as a reason for the decision too. It is one of the largest expulsions of diplomats from the US. 2 holiday homes for Russian diplomats were also shut down, with some media outlets saying that they were actually spy houses. Well, the sanctions also targeted Russia's 2 main intelligence agencies too. 4 top military intelligence officials have been blacklisted by the US. 3 companies have also been singled out for supposedly supporting Russian cyber operations against the Democratic Party. However, in a surprise move, Vladimir Putin decided not to retaliate.
We reserve the right for tit-for-tat measures, but we won't stoop to kitchen diplomacy. We'll plan our next steps to restore Russian-US relations based on policy which the new administration of Donald Trump will pursue. We won't create hurdles for American diplomats. We won't expel anyone. We won't ban their families and children from using their usual places of rest during the holiday season. Moreover, I invite all the children of American diplomats in Russia to a New Year and Christmas party in the Kremlin.
US President-elect Donald Trump praised Putin for the decision not to retaliate, while also calling on the US to move on to bigger and better things. He said he will meet with intelligence chiefs next week. And talking to reporters on New Year's Eve, he also warned against accusing Russia of hacking without any serious proof. Former US diplomat Jim Tatras thinks that the Obama administration may be deliberately complicating relations with Moscow for the incoming president.
Seems to me, if you look at this in the big picture of the failure of the Obama administration and its relationship with Moscow, its failure in Syria that we now see U.S. being sidelined, I think Obama is trying to salvage what's left of his tattered legacy by saying, I'm going to slam the door as loud as I can and make things as difficult as I can for the guy succeeding me. What's the political goal in his doing so? I think it is to try to undermine the incoming Trump presidency and to box him in, to make it harder for him to warm relations with Moscow, to try to create as much damage and leave as much of a mess on the welcome mat at the White House as he can for Mr. Trump.
Well, the new sanctions were unveiled after the release of a joint report by the FBI and Homeland Security. It goes over the technical details of the alleged hacks, but doesn't explain how Russia is involved. The report actually contains a disclaimer too, saying that the document's information can't be confirmed and is for informational purposes only. We asked experts whether there is any evidence to back up the accusations.
They're just covering their backs, aren't they? They know it's a bunch of rubbish. I mean, the fact that they're not actually standing by, they're not warranting the report they put out today, the Department of Homeland Security, rather points to the fact that it is pure propaganda, and they know it. There's a lot of information in there about, you know, the technological spec, that sort of thing. They're trying to blind people with science, but there's no real evidence.
There are so many qualifiers in this report. There's even a disclaimer at the beginning of the report saying, you know, this may or may not be true. They certainly didn't go no further in establishing how these two hacking groups, if they were indeed responsible for the hacks, how they were tied to the Russian government whatsoever.
It was a good outline of how phishing-type attacks or attacks occur, but it didn't say anything about who did what to the Democratic National Committee or when they did it, how much data they took out, where they sent the data, did they pass it to WikiLeaks, and so on. It did none of that. So it's just a way to alert system administrators to watch out for this type of attack. That doesn't prove anything.
Well, despite the lack of proof then, any substantial proof, reports of alleged Russian hacking have been circulating Western media outlets for months already.
We are also following new details on the Russians' motives for hacking and meddling in the U.S. presidential election.
Hacking and leaking that the administration says the Russians carried out.
The CIA has concluded Russian hackers intervened in the U.S. election.
The fact that they did not focus on this issue to the extent that we thought they would and they should is something that I think the press needs to do some introspection about.
Do you believe Vladimir Putin himself authorized the hack, and do you believe he authorized that to help Donald Trump?
I give the intelligence community the chance to gather all the information, but I'd make a larger point, which is not much happens in Russia without Vladimir Putin.
Do you feel any obligation now, as they've been insisting that this isn't the case, to show the proof, as it were? They say put your money where your mouth is and declassify some of the intelligence, some of the evidence that exists.
We will provide evidence that we can safely provide.
Does the DOD or NSA, or any U.S. agency for that matter, have any evidence that the Russians, either their agents, operatives, or government, that they hacked into the emails of the Democratic National Committee?
What proof does anyone have that they affected the outcome? Because I've heard zero. Okay? So show me what facts have actually shown that anything undermined that election.
So the CIA says that Russia did, in fact, attempt to sway the U.S. presidential election in favor of Donald Trump. What most media isn't doing is actually asking for evidence of these claims.
Some electors, mostly Democrats, are questioning Russia's role in the presidential election.
What I want is the information to be out there so that the American public and electors know who has been involved.
You're watching RT International. It's good to have your company today. More news from me in about half an hour's time. Up next, though, it is part 2 of one man's gruelling journey through the US justice system in Bloodsworth, an innocent man.